Okay, good afternoon everybody. I'm going to pass the word to Professor Wilson, coordinador do Programa de Ciência e Complexidade.
Inicio dizendo que é Fernando Sartor. Boa tarde a todos e todas. Vou quebrar o protocolo para falar em português nesse primeiro momento, mas não podemos, primeiramente, agradecer a presença de cada um de vocês a este workshop organizado pela professora Chloe, junto ao programa de pós-graduação Ciência, Tecnologia e Sociedade. O momento que vivemos da universidade, o processo de internacionalização, é de fundamental importância. Quando nós pensamos na internacionalização, nós pensamos muitas vezes no processo de mobilidade acadêmica, né? Mas nós acho que precisamos ampliar esse debate, e uma das estratégias é através da realização de espaços de aprendizagem, de reflexão, de sistematização, como esse que a professora Chloe oportunizou. Começou de uma forma muito simples, aparentemente, né? Nós temos uma demanda, internacionalizar e como ampliar esses processos. Hoje, o programa de pós-graduação Ciência, Tecnologia e Sociedade tem a felicidade, né, de termos aí uma mobilidade internacional. Tivemos doutorandos na modalidade PhD em Portugal, atualmente na Itália, e com perspectivas de continuar esse processo. Mas essa é apenas uma vertente. Os nossos textos, as nossas reflexões, como é que a gente amplia neste cenário. Então, é aí que entra esse processo. E eu diria que, assim, sem sombra de dúvidas, a universidade, cumprindo seu papel do ponto de vista público e gratuito, né, oportuniza essa reflexão que deu muito trabalho para a professora Chloe, muito motivada e engajada neste processo, e que nos coloca um diferencial. Todos nós sabemos, né, o quanto essa aproximação com o nativo, né, também é importante, né, nesse processo de aprendizagem. Então, fica aí dois registros. O primeiro registro é um agradecimento muito especial à professora Chloe, que esteve à frente de todo esse processo, não mediu esforços e fez um trabalho muito bonito que a gente pode estar observando. Nasce numa disciplina que tem ocorrido, então, por isso algumas carteiras com a indicação de reservado, porque o pessoal está regularmente matriculado no processo e abre a comunidade nessa perspectiva de um workshop com alguns encontros ao longo da semana. Então, o primeiro registro é a pessoa da professora Chloe. Aos palestrantes, né, muito obrigado, bem-vindos à Universidade Federal de São Carlos, e a cada um de vocês, né, por aderirem, por acreditar nesta questão. Claro que vamos precisar fazer outros workshops em língua espanhola, em língua portuguesa, por que não, né? Mas fica aí o registro. Claro, desejando um bom trabalho para você, ok? Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Professor Wilson. And I'll just talk about the rest of the program this week before I welcome our guest speaker for today. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here. Thank you for being here. After today, tomorrow we have the workshop number 1 with Jane Coury, who is a master in applied linguistics, and she is an English teacher and a translator with many years of experience, and also she's a Cambridge oral examiner. And her workshop is called Helping Brazilian Researchers Write Academic Papers in English. So there's a little bit of an intersection, but a different sort of approach with today's talk. Workshop 2 with her, again, with Jane, on Thursday, that's the 11th of August, tips on presenting academic papers and networking at international conferences, very useful. And then the last lecture, the last talk, will be on Friday morning. So I think that Jane's is on tomorrow afternoon, and then on Thursday morning. And then the one on Friday morning is with Beverly Young, who is also an English teacher with many years' experience and a translator, and her talk is called Translators Are Not Miracle Workers, You Are. Okay, so I'd just like to emphasize again, you're very welcome. It's great to see such a nice big audience for this event, and we hope maybe this will be the first of a few like this. Obviously today we start with a great talk by a wonderful researcher here from San Carlos with an amazing CV, although I must admit I didn't go into your curriculum lectures, so I can't read it all out, but it's extremely diverse. He's a top of the line physicist, you know, here at COSME in San Carlos, in the Institute of Physics San Carlos, COSME. And he also works a little bit in computing and linguistics and dabbles. He's one of these, you know, the old-fashioned type of scientist who's the amazing philosopher and scientist and can look at lots of different areas from different points, angles, and come with new insights. So it's a great honor today to welcome Professor Dr. Osvaldo Novais de Oliveira, Jr. Please talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. But I must say, the introduction is getting perhaps nicer and nicer when I'm talking. The only sentence I have is that I'm getting older. Because if you are too young as you are, you cannot have work in many different areas because you simply not have time. So it's a great honor for me to give this lecture, and I wish I were here for the whole week because I'm sure I have tremendous time and to learn so much that's going to be taught here in the other lectures as well. I will talk about a piece of work that has been going on for more than 20 years, and it started out of need, because I wrote to Britain for doing my PhD, and as a physicist, knew nothing about linguistics or scientific writing, and but I did like to study, and I did study grammar, so I knew the English grammar, I knew the vocabulary, but my writing was very good. And that's difficult. So my supervisor would get my reports of the first draft of paper, and I would ask, "Did you understand?" "Yes, I did." "Is it good?" "Oh, that's nice." But then what's wrong? "Oh, there is nothing wrong, but we have to rewrite it." Nothing was wrong, but it was no good. And this is very frustrating because, what should you do? If there is something wrong, you learn what's wrong and try to do it right next time. But if you don't know what is wrong, how can you do it? So just by intuition, I started to see how the natives wrote their text. So I would gather papers and books and be watching and seeing how they express themselves in English. Mind you that these are the 80s, 1980s, so there was a computer, thank God, but no electronic media. I did not have papers on electronic media, so I had to type, get the Xerox copy of the papers and type in all the expressions. So I started doing this and trying to see how the native. After a few months, I started seeing the results because I was, I don't know, perhaps I became obsessed with that. And I would work every evening, all the weekends, and collecting data. I now know that what I was doing was a sort of corpus linguistics. I didn't know it. And you know, it was really unfortunate that I didn't know, because when you look at the history of corpus linguistics, you see that in the late 80s there was very little, and there was nothing for scientific writing. Had I known that I was doing corpus linguistics and that there was nothing there, I could have claimed that I was inventing something. But I was not aware about that. What I wanted to do was to learn how things were said in English, not the Brazilian way, not with the English to the beginning, but English. So I improved my writing. My supervisor was ever so glad. And then he asked me, how did you do it? And then I showed him my corpus. I know now that it was a corpus, but for me it was a list, which is absolutely everything that I know in English. It's a 31-page single-spaced, 31-page corpus of English sentences. That's all I ever learned to write scientifically. So I showed him how I was doing and in my corpus, and he said, oh, that's very good because it works. And he made me promise that when I came back to Brazil after my PhD, that I will try and disseminate the idea of how non-natives could learn how to write English. So when I came back in 1990, I started looking for people who would be great enough to work on this area, and the main idea was to build software tools to help non-native users of English. And I was I was very lucky to have Sandra Luizio, who I'm going to mention several times, who took this subject for her PhD, did a wonderful job in producing software tools to help non-natives in writing English. And I will be mentioning here and give the references as well, so that you can go and look at actually you can go and see at our web page, which is the Computational Linguistics Center. It's a multi-institutional one, so there is people in our computer science department, here at Confiscar Letras, in the computer science department, and from Letras in Abertura as well. So now you have the background, how it happened, how I got interested in scientific writing. So when I came back to Brazil, we started developing these tools, and I gave a few courses. And the first official course in scientific writing at the graduate level was in 2006. And since the address should be somewhere, but I think unless you switch the light on. Yes, and especially those related to corpus linguistics, they apply to academic writing as well as scientific writing. But just in making this distinction, I just mentioned that scientific writing is embedded in academic writing, which is more generic. So, the other thing which is important is that learning academic writing more or less corresponds to also learning the scientific method. And I explain why. It comes in the rest of this page, this slide. Because writing means that you are going to try to get the message that you want to convey across. Your results, your ideas, the new concepts, your innovation that introduced in your work. So, when you are going to write your paper, you have to answer those questions. Which are the contributions of your work? How should you organize the ideas and results? And you see, this is generic for scientific writing or academic writing. And as you do this in the writing, you learn in many cases, perhaps too late, that you should perhaps have done other experiments or other studies to be able to reply to those questions. To this sort of calls our attention for the important thing that when you devise your study, when you set out to do your research project, you should be aware of where you want to go. What's the scientific problem you're going to address? And if you solve that problem, where I just really, that's another quote that I like from this chemist from Harvard, Professor Whiteside. He's also a local scientist interested in scientific writing. And this quote that he said, interested and published is equivalent to non-existent. So if you do a piece of study and you just produce a report, the only person who is really going to care about it is your mother, not the father, your mother. You give it to your mother, she'll keep it safe forever, and she will appreciate it, even if she doesn't read or if she doesn't understand. Apart from that, it's of no use. So if you don't publish, your ideas are not recorded, are not in print, are not out. So we need to publish what we do. But then there is this important concept here, that what we should publish is not just mere results, but the ideas and concepts. And these obviously apply to all areas. In the sciences, hard sciences in particular, the students in many cases make this mistake. They get a lot of data, results of graphs, plots, figures, and they think they have a paper because they collected so much data. But I keep telling them, unless you have ideas and concepts which are supported by this data, you do not have a basis for publication. So you only have basis for publication once you have the results and the data transformed into ideas, innovations, concepts. So when you build a project for a scientific work, I mean scientific that could be in any other area, then work as well. So you have the idea, hypothesis, or the topic that you choose, and then you implement the research. The research could be theoretical, experimental, or any type of research. You get the results, get the data. Then, as I mentioned before, many students then to jump from the results to the output. I advise that they should stop and try to interpret the data in a way that they can extract the main ideas, the main concepts, what's really new, and that's going to contribute to the literature. Mind you that the ideas could be used for learning how to write scientific English. For this audience, I don't have to explain what's corpus linguistics. I got it from Wikipedia. I kept the slide because I usually give this talk for non-experts and non-specialists in language, so I have to explain what's all these robots will do marvelous things. Language is now central because most of the knowledge is expressed in language, and the computers have to understand. So now there are so many natural language tools that are used. We do not realize it, but they're there. For instance, when you're using your smartphone, many of the functionalities of the smartphone have natural language processing tools embedded, and almost all of them have been developed with corpus linguistics. So huge corpora that are being gathered by Google, for instance, and that allows them to do so much now. So I usually mention that for those like me, when I'm in doubt of how to use an expression, I know that people just Google it and see, but then as you Google, you go to a web page, it could be, from anywhere. So I was, a few months ago, I was in doubt about that term, and then I Googled it and found that this term indeed existed, but it came from a Brazilian website. So I said, oh, this is Brazilian English, it's no good. So eventually this Coca corpus, it's contemporary corpus of English, American English, that are equivalent for British English as well. I use Coca because it's easy to remember when I have to find it, and I don't have it in my favorite. So this is very useful when you want to see how a word is used or how an expression is used or whether you get it right or not. I guess, I mean, who has ever used a corpus like that to help in writing? Nobody? Wow. So it's good that I got this slide. That's really very useful. So when you want to check whether things are said right. So in this particular case, the word study, which has 20-something instances, and then you see how it's used. Now, before we go to the strategies to try and learn English, let's talk about the structure of a paper. Here, the structure of a paper, I have in mind a paper in science, physics, chemistry, biology. The structure is different from other areas like the humanities or social sciences, but you can readily appreciate that you could adapt the structure, including field sections. But all in all, you usually have in a paper title of the affiliation, the abstract, introduction, then methodology, then results and discussion, and conclusion. Obviously, some of the things may change. You may have to introduce new sections to talk about a specific topic, or the section which gives the results. You don't call it results, but it's essentially showing what you found. And when you do it, you should pay attention to two things. For introduction, the flow of the prose should go from the more general to the more specific. So it's like an inverted comma. So you start with a more general topic of your research. In the end, towards the end of the research, you explain, you give the reader the information, provide the reader the information of what your study or your paper is going to show. In the conclusion sections, on the contrary, you start with the more specific things, so you recall the main findings of your paper, and then you talk about the implications of your paper for the area, or the society, or whatever. So you do the opposite movement. Rather than going from the general to the specific, you go from the specific to the more general information. So the introduction and the abstract and the conclusions have opposite movements. The abstract, which is there represented just like a rectangle, should work. This is just because I'm not really very good at PowerPoint, but the shape of the abstract should reproduce the shape of the whole paper, because abstract is just a mini version of the paper. So it should start more in the more general thing with the context, give the context, give the results, and then towards the end, give the conclusion. And I'm going to talk about the abstract specifically because that's the most important part of our paper. So there are two ways of writing an abstract. The easy way, which is descriptive, to just describe what you did without worrying to tell your reader what are the main conclusions, what are the main results. That's what I call the descriptive way of writing an abstract. There is another one, which is the informative way, in which you put in the abstract every single piece of information which is essential for the paper. You may say, but I spent 3 or 4 years doing my thesis, and how do you expect me to put everything in just 1 page for that? I say, my reply to this is the following. The dream of any scientist is to have just 1 line in the review, which reads as follows: Nobel Prize for this is for physics, chemistry. No, in human and social sciences, you may have another important prize or whatever. That's it. So the dream of a scientist is to have a 1 line, 1 sentence CV. Einstein is an exception. He needs 3 or 4 lines. But all the other scientists, 1 line is good enough for the good ones. But if the guy is not that good, so you have to get the last. Then you count papers, count citations, prizes, whatever. You start counting because you don't have just 1 line. And what can you do? You don't have. So this is just to show that less can be much better. So the abstract should be short and direct to the point, and have the main contributions of the work. So the way to do an abstract is the informative way, not descriptive. Descriptive abstract only applies for cases in which you are, for instance, doing a survey of the literature, or an abstract or a summary of a book or book chapter, because then you are talking about subjects and results that have been produced even by other researchers, not just as your own research. So apart from that, the abstract should always be important. It's more difficult because you have to put all the ideas together, all the contributions together, and choose the most important ones. And the abstract has a structure. The first component is the background. So you offer the reader what your research is all about, so the context. Then the purpose, which is compulsory, has also you have to say in the abstract what's the aim of the study, methodology, main results, and conclusion. If the journal, or depends on where you're going to publish, in many cases the journals require you to write an abstract which only say 100 or 150 words. When this is the case, usually you cannot have space. Space is not large enough to include the background. So you start the abstract with the purpose. This slide shows. I'm going to show an abstract later on, just by way of illustration, and I'll come back to this point. In the introduction, what I mentioned before is that you do this movement of going to the more general to the more specific topic. So this is a model proposed by John Swayze from the University of Michigan, a linguist. So you see, even the vocabulary is a vocabulary of a linguist. I'm going to show you the next slide, the vocabulary of a computer scientist. The same thing, but on the vocabulary of the computer scientist. So what John Swayze proposed is that the introduction should have 3 moves. The first one is establishing a theory term, which we call giving the context, and then establish a niche and occupy the niche. You may ask whether John Swayze just had out of his mind, whether he just got out of his ideas of producing papers, or whether these ideas came from corpus. And the answer is the latter. So he analyzed a lot of papers and then found the way the papers are structured for the introductions like that. So in fact, what we do in analyzing a corpus of the literature and proposing models of how papers should be written is a sort of inversed way of doing that. We do not propose how the paper should be written. We go and analyze how the papers are written, the good papers, and then we start showing. Which means that you have acceptance by the community because you are proposing something that is the standard way of doing that. So, when we get our writing tools, the granularity of the classification should be much finer because the computer had to work with sections, components, and strategies so that we could help the user in writing the whole paper. I'm going to show one of the tools that was developed by Sandra Luiz and her team, which is for the pharmacy area that we can understand. So when I show this example, this will be more clear for you. But this was the model for the introduction proposed by Sandra, and then it has setting, so the give the context, and in setting you have the strategies. So which are the possible ways of establishing the setting. Then you have review, that usually is included in the introduction, types of gap, so get what's missing in the literature. And this classification is so, the granularity is so fine because she would see the types of sentences that she found in papers, in real papers, and then she would classify them. Because if you just collect the expressions or sentences and to try to learn how to write it, but you don't classify it, once you get it, it's very difficult to retrieve. So I did in my corpus, and then Sandra had to do it for the writing tools. You have to know what that phrase, that particular phrase is good for. What sort of role it can play. In which part of the paper you can use that. So you have to classify all of your corpus according to these components and strategies. So you see, there is a section, introduction, methodology, results, and so on. Then there are the components and then strategies. So it's a very fine granularity in the classification. So there are many different strategies. So now I'll go to the strategy that we've been using, what we call learning by doing. So you start to do it and you learn. Collect data and learn. It will take me around 10-15 minutes to show the 9 steps, but obviously it may take much longer for you to practice. And so I like this quote by Stella Paganini, which is actually the book, when she says that most part of the language is compositional in the sense that some chunks of text are already in our mind. And then all we have to do is put them together. The problems for the non-native is that we do not have the right chunks in our minds. And that's what we have to acquire. So mastering these chunks and using them appropriately is what makes a language sound natural and fluent. And that's what fluent is. Before I go to the strategy, it's just a piece of work done by Karen Darrell. And she checked whether the textual patterns were different when she compared text produced by Brazilian students and texts produced by native speakers published in the literature. What she found was that the patterns were actually different. And in fact, if you go and see the literature, there is evidence that scholars, that experienced writers, experienced scientists, usually employ textual patterns that are different from Novais writers, even when they are all natives. because the person has more experience, probably a more sophisticated use of the language. So actually, when you see in the next slide, the data for a single example, she compared, when stating the purpose of the study, she compared what the Brazilian students did and what she found in the literature by native writers. So, for instance, Brazilian students tend to use a lot of this expression. The aim of this study is to, whereas there is a much lower frequency of this expression in texts and papers published by native speakers. On the contrary, Brazilian students tend to use less the active form of the verb compared to papers to authors, native authors publishing in journals. So actually, the patterns that we use are not the same as the experienced writers. And what we want is to learn those patterns. So now comes the strategy. What I said, they take years or months to learn. And it's learned by example, learn how the others do it, know the structure, because one important thing about using cognitive linguistics for learning scientific writing is that you can learn the structure of the paper, the structure of the sections, how ideas are interconnected, and then you can learn sentence by sentence how the argument is constructed. So, obviously, learn by example does not mean, for God's sake, does not mean copying. Starting from is your own, and again, we repeat this. By law, if you use more than 20, a string of text with more than 20-something terms which are the same, this is plagiarism, so you're bound to be taken to court. And mind you that in itself, plagiarism is not allowed. So if you publish a study, publish a paper, so the next one you want to refer to your previous one, you cannot copy that. Nothing. So some students don't understand this. They say, no, but I'm copying from my own text. You cannot. The only time this is accepted is when you are making a quote. So, inverted commas or in italic, and then you reproduce what somebody said, or even you in a previous study. That's the only thing, only and unique time or that you can actually copy. Otherwise, you cannot copy. So, never copy. So there are 9 steps. First one, select the text from reliable sources. So, get native speakers, experienced ones, guys that you know are very good. Books are excellent for this. Because usually books are well written, they have been well proofread and so on. So books and papers, review papers are also very good. And then read the material critically. That's something which is very different from what you usually do when you're studying a subject. So if you get a paper and you want to understand the contents of the paper, you have to concentrate on what the ideas there, the data, the results. For this type of study, this does not matter. The contents do not matter. What matters is the form, the way it is written. So you can read the papers in a much faster fashion because you do not have to understand the contents. But what you need to do is to see how things are said. Oh, this is a nice way to counter argument when if you don't agree with an idea. There are ways of doing that. There are ways of defining introducing, listing, so on. So every time you just say, well, that's a figure one day, but I might need to use, so you can select those sentences. So you should annotate expressions that convey important messages for your work. So the first step. The second one, you should mark the messages. When I'm going to show an extract of my corpus later on. So when I started collecting phrases, I would just keep the expressions that in which there was no factual information. And then I would just put dots in where the factual information should be included, just to save my time. But now, because you have an electronic file, you can copy the whole sentence, and then you can mark which are the expressions that may be of interest to you, and the others you can leave in mind. So when there is factual information that's not going to be useful for your purposes. So writing these messages should be part of your learning life while you're doing it. Then you have to classify all these sentences that you're collecting. There are two strategies to do it. The first one is the easiest, in which you got an expression from a certain section of a paper, so you put that expression in your corpus in that particular section. So the corpus will be divided in a paper, so there is the abstract, the components of the abstract, and the strategies. And you're going to populate sentences or expressions in every single strategy, and then component, and then section. That's why it's a lot of work. So do it for the abstract, do it for the introduction, then the methodology, and so on and so forth. So the first way of classifying is to get the phrases or the expressions and put in the same place that you found in the original paper. That's easier, but you don't learn how to reshuffle the material. Just an example, this is a paper by Whitesides, and it is as if he was in a lecture of scientific writing, the way to do it, and he does precisely the way you see in the models. There is the context gap, so what's missing, the purpose of the study, methodology, results, and conclusion. So if you like, or if you think that the expression that he is using there may be useful for your work, which is not our case here, because this is chemistry or material science. I don't think there is any chemistry. Is that any chemistry? You can, if you think that they are important phrases that may be useful to you, you take and put in the same place. Like in this case, you put in the abstract, in the context, and so on. Mind that you have to learn how to classify the contents. So you get the structure, for instance, if you go to the writing tools that Sandra provides in our website, a new website, there is a full structure of a paper. So you need to, when you read a paper, you need to be able to classify which part of which section, section is easy because it's titled, but which component it belongs to. So you have to learn it. That's one a learning step, an important learning step, because you can only write good text if you can recognize and identify what a good text is. What's the purpose of the text? And in fact, that's something that's more or less common sense. We always, people keep telling us always that to write well, we have to read a lot. That's true, but not read in any random way. You read in the way I mentioned to you, paying attention how things are written. That's more important than actually trying to understand the contents. So the second strategy for this step is the following. You collect there are hundreds or thousands of sentences, expressions, and then you shuffle those, and then try to place each sentence or each expression in the right place. So obviously it's much more time consuming, but it's more efficient in terms of learning. So now comes the fourth step. In the fourth step, you need to find different ways of saying more or less the same thing. So you collect all your pieces of sentences and phrases, but obviously you need diversity. You cannot express yourself always the same way. So you have to try and find distinct ways of conveying your rhetorical messages. In the fifth step, before I go to the fifth, that's an extract of my original corpus. Those times, as I mentioned to you, I had no idea what corpus linguistics was or even linguistics. So the name that I gave they were just by intuition. So rather than call it setting, I call it importance of the field, general interest, and so on. And then instead of review of the literature, just previous reports related work and so on. And as you see here, I would write things and then put dots so that I didn't have to type every single word. If you go if you Google now academic phrase bank, you go to the site of Professor John Morley from the University of Manchester, and you find there precisely exactly the same strategy. His work is much newer than mine, so he did it over the last few years, and he was also inspired on Swayer's work, so the source of some of the ideas of corpus linguistics are the same. And you can even buy the corpus. It costs £9. You can buy the corpus, it's more than 100 pages. I did buy it because I wanted to see. For all areas, not only scientific writing but academic writing, in all sections. So you have expressions to say almost anything in the beginning. The ideas are precisely the same. So the fifth step now is filling the content of your own material. So now you have the expressions, but you want to write your own text. So that I want to say this and get sort of the framework of the sentence, and you have to fill in the gaps. Filling in the gaps can be really hard because you may find it difficult to put on your own words. But then you can do a trick. You can go to many other sentences in which there is similar factual information for what you want, and see how those pieces of information were written there. And then you can find ways of filling in the gaps, also using a corpus. So this reduces the possibility of making mistakes. So it's possible that when you're writing your own text, you find that you want to say something and there is not in your corpus a phrase or sentence to express it. So this means that your corpus is not complete, it's not big enough. So you should keep on collecting more and more phrases in text. Number 6, now that you have all the expressions, 8 is useful. It's useful to classify them, not according to the sections, components, and strategy of a paper, but according to the rhetorical messages. So, for instance, many kids want to make a contrast, to define, to compare, to describe, to counter-argue. In all of those cases, we need help to how we should say this. So that's You can use the same material but classify, go and find, search for phrases which have those types of rhetorical messages. So that once you need to do, I want to do a definition. So go there and find, say, 200 phrases of definition of things. So you look at that with so many examples, you will know, you'll be able to write a definition in a proper way. That's number 6. Number 7 is, this explained as I mentioned. Number 7 now, you should be, so far I just mentioned sentences and phrases. But obviously you need to produce paragraphs, the whole text, and then you have to start combining sentences. In combining sentences, then you have to pay a lot of attention. Not to use very long sentences. That's one thing. And second, you need to use these connectors, this problem. So that's something which I know we Brazilians make so many mistakes with some words. It's really a nightmare. So how you learn it? Go to Corpus, for instance. See there, however, be 100,000 examples, which is too many. You don't need to get 100,000. Let's say 1,000. After 1,000 times, and you see however it's used, you know it. So you need to give coherency to a piece of text, and you need to know how to do it. Using the connectives properly is one of the most important. And number 8 is now time to produce the complete section of a paper. So you choose what you want to say, what other to say, what do introduction. So you want to have the setting, you want to have the review of the literature, so on and so forth. So you choose the components and structures, get the sentence that you're producing, and put in a whole piece of text. And obviously, you should check the use of connectives and the coherence of the piece of text. Number 8 is almost there. Now we have the number 9. And that's a very important message for students. Once you finish your text, a piece of text, or report, paper, whatever, is it ready? No, by any means. You have to read it. You say, it seems obvious that you have to read, but students don't seem to read. They give you something to read, a report or papers, they haven't read. They are so fed up with the piece of text, or the paper that they say, oh, that's ready. And they don't check. So the 9th step is adding whatever, or in this case a paper with the report. Check spelling and grammar. There's no excuse for someone who makes mistake in spelling. Grammar is not, the grammar checkers that we have available are still not very good, so you may make mistakes. So it doesn't check all of your mistakes. Eliminate unnecessary words, which is one of the most terrible things about students writing. So many words that you can just cross and it doesn't make a difference. Check consistency of some components and their relationship of the components, and analyze the contents. This is context for the paper. Obviously, you have to do it when you are adding context. Keep in mind, you have to emphasize the most important contributions, the findings. This is a slide by Sara Luis showing some of the tools that she produced over the time. And this one in particular is interesting. This is for proficiency exams for English. And this is applied for the computer science and statistics graduate studies in USP, the computer science department. But perhaps the best, the easiest one to show is this produced for the pharmacy area. And this is the interface, but you don't see I don't think you can read them, but I'll change to the previous slide and that's going to show. Suppose you want to write a paper and you want to choose the components. Or for instance, this is for the summary, for the abstract. So there is context, depth, purpose, methodology, result, and conclusion. So in every single component there are the strategies. Suppose that you choose some of these strategies to produce your abstract. Then you click on those items, and then the system automatically compares to her database, seeing which papers have the same or similar structure that was requested. So you can see a real abstract or a real production which has more or less the same structure that you want to write. Just to give you as a sample example. And in this particular tool, you can have all the components, status and subcomponents. For instance, abstract, you have background, depth, purpose, methodology, main result, and so on. And then the components are further classified in strategies, as I mentioned. So if you go to the website, you get everything in the structure of our paper so that you can take from there. And I would advise that in your case, because you're working on humanities and social sciences, so the structure of the paper is not going to be the same, but it's already a good first exercise for you to complement the structure. So rather than getting the structure for the pharmacy area, which is so good for you, you get those and say, no, the papers in my area do not have the same structure. What are the differences? So you can find the differences, you can find the new sections, new components, and so on. So that's a first learning exercise. So now we're coming to the end. First, this strategy was not conceived to teach English. We actually expect the student to be able to read, because if the student, the proficiency of the student is not sufficient for the student to read a paper, so you can only apply this method. But anyhow, even though it is not designed for teaching English, using a corpus is always an excellent way of learning how language is used in context. So you may be tired of not even doing it, but just listening to me. Too many steps, too much homework because you have to do it, too much reading and so on. But then the only thing I say is that if you do it, you learn. And in fact, that's the disclaimer in the next slide. That I've seen so many people learning a lot. So many, I mean, how many I don't know because we do not keep track. But many people learned. It started with me and my wife. The first two to use that. And then I saw so many other people learning. But in all cases, it's not because the strategy is good, it's just because people put an effort on it. Otherwise, we don't know. And the other thing which is important is that this does not replace solid learning of English. So you need to know English. So otherwise, it's difficult. If you don't. Talking about the 9 steps, I'm glad to say that we just reduced the 9 steps to 3 steps. It makes life much easier. Which is the following 3 steps. Acquire the book, read the book, and apply what you read. That's the only 3 steps. With this, I finish. Thank you very much.
question in Portuguese, you can. But if you want to ask a question in English, no problem. Okay? Practice your English. Nobody's going to criticize or judge. But, you know, so that the debate flows a bit more, maybe you want to ask a question in English, Portuguese, that's no problem. And the other thing is, I should have clarified with you that actually people are from all different areas here. Yeah, we do have some exact scientists here. Scientists, you know, engineers, people from different Africa, so there's lots of different areas here. It's not just so. Any questions?
About anything. Yeah. In any language? I mean, so is it being recorded? So
yeah, it is actually.
So
yeah.
So it's better.
Professor, I'd like to thank you for your lecture. It was very sweet. I'm a PhD candidate at the Institute, and one thing that I see in my colleagues, I often see this kind of behavior. They try to apply your method, but I don't know if they read your book but they just glue the sentence together. They pick the sentence from the articles and they put in some strange way. So the papers, although they have a lot of expressions that are common in other papers, they are empty, they are not easy to read because they are some kind of strange. I refer that they don't put themselves on the paper, they just copy some expressions and they try to communicate as other researcher or other. The whole point, the main point is where do you think the students should put themselves? What the experience they have on the writing of English?
So that's really important remark. It's no good if you just try to cut and paste the sentence, because then you do not have your own paper, and cohesion and coherence can be jeopardized. I mean, you are not going to have nice piece of text to read if you just do it. I think the way to go is that before you have to use the strategy for writing a real paper that you are pressed to do it, and they have a deadline, you should practice with sort of virtual papers that you are not, you don't have to write it, and do a lot of experiments before. You need to practice and practice the several parts of the text, not just trying to get the paper all of course. And you need to, after you build your piece of text, you have to do the same procedure. Does it look like say a piece of text written by a native for what you are saying from your colleagues? You're just doing sentences. They are not getting the same result. So you have to do it again and again, try to make sure that you are combining the sentences in a way that makes sense. So you have to practice and text and read it and read it and make sure that the readability is good. So that's the only way. You have to do it several times for the different components, and then check later on whether your piece of text is any good. It always helps if you have someone reading the textbook. This helps a lot. And in fact, if you could have groups of say 4 or 5 people working on the corpus and on the learning, that would be very good, because peer review is very efficient for this. It's amazing in the lectures, in the classes I give in our scientific writing course. I just explain to the students how an abstract should be written. So in the beginning of the class. In the end, they bring samples of abstracts. Everybody is able to criticize, to say whether it's good or not, what's good or what's not. Criticizing and seeing what is good or bad is much easier than producing. So if you have peer review among your friends, then you learn a lot. And then you avoid this. So for instance, if you tell your colleagues that the strategies they are following the strategies are not good because they're trying to use the strategies in the book but not in the right way, if you tell them that, it will help them, because then they'll try and see, look, if it's sounding funny, it's not good.
So when we read this strategy, and only after I don't know the words, have the security with the vector, we can be right and select texts written by native speakers.
I think as you start reading, you can start collecting as well. Obviously, I'm assuming that you can read it properly, that you can distinguish what's good and what's not good. So if you can do it, you can already start collecting the sentences. And so that's something which has been shown by linguists for many decades, that reception of a language, settlement, is much easier than the production. So then I learned what my difficulty was. So I could understand, I could appreciate what a good text was, but I could not produce. So as soon as you can read properly, you can start collecting pretty much. Collecting, but you have to do it in a systematized way. You have to do it systematically, otherwise you cannot use it later on. And then you have to start practicing. Like this filling the gaps. It's very easy to say, but it takes a lot of time to fill in the gaps. And then combining sentences to avoid the problem that you mentioned.
This corpus is an online tool and free of charge?
Free of charge.
Okay. And I don't understand, this psychopharmacia is a software too? Yes.
Psychopharmacia is available at our website, new website. And if you just Google Psychopharmacia, you'll get there. And it's also obviously free. For those who prefer British English, you could use the BNC, the British National Corpus, which is also a very good one for British English rather than American English. Even though for academic writing, I don't see any difference.
Thank you very much for talking. I've got a couple of questions. One of the first things you said was it's a very common mistake for people to jump from the results to the output without thinking of producing new ideas or concepts. And I was just wondering, thinking more from the point of view of kind of difference between maybe master students and doctorate students, would you say that for a master student, they've got to follow that rule as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this should apply to any even undergraduate students, because they need to learn what the purpose of the work is, what the ideas are. So if they are not able to do it, then it's not good.
my other question was, you said something, how the thing about learning to write scientific papers helps to organize your research, and one thing that we notice sometimes here as teachers is, well, I think this is obvious in any language, Portuguese and English, if you're not thinking rationally, that's going to come out on the paper. So I was wondering, would you recommend maybe as you research, you write? You don't wait to finish, you write as you research?
That's right. I think that's in fact the research project, which in our case, in our country, we'll always have to write the research project.
Yeah.
And then you have to start writing from the beginning, even before you start.
So you could be even thinking about an article before you could be thinking about an article, a specific article, and just be getting the data and writing and structuring as you go. Yeah. So filling in the gaps, literally.
That's right. And in fact, in many cases, you may have a very specific purpose for the research. If you're searching, you want to answer a question of Palestra hypothesis. So you have you know what you're looking for, and you may even know where would you publish it. So you should keep that in mind. And I don't know whether this applies to any field, but in my field, in many very aggressive research groups in Germany or in the US, this is right from the beginning. And you have to be ashamed if you are going to discuss your proposal without having a clear idea what you're going to do. And mind you, the other important subject is the following. You need to have a proposal which is original. So you propose to do something, and then the supervisor will come and say, look, but this has been done, or similar work has been done by such and such people. And therefore you need to know the literature. Because that's the other message which I did not emphasize in the lecture, but knowing the literature is essential for any area, which is more or less obvious, but we keep forgetting it. You need to know the literature in your field. Otherwise, it's very hard to do any reasonable research if you don't know the literature. You need to know the literature. And in this case, not only how things are said, because how things are said may be in completely different fields. You may get a material for your corpus from very many different fields, from other fields far from your field. There's no problem whatsoever. It's actually even good if you get material for your corpus in different areas. But the literature you need to know in your area. So that's something which I should have mentioned as well. That for collecting material, you should, in many cases, go away from your area. For methodology, you need to look what's written in your area, because you have to describe the methods, and then you need to know how your peers do it. But for many other, for abstract conclusions, introduction, it doesn't need to be in your area. Actually, I think it's even better if you look at other areas, because it gives you more insight.
Other things, I notice sometimes if people ask me to have a paper in English, and a thing that I think people learn in school in Brazil maybe is that you can't repeat certain words. But then I sometimes find myself arguing and saying, yeah, but for scientific research, you can't be using different terms for what you're talking about, you know? So I just wondered if you find that is a common occurrence. And the other thing is paragraph size. Because paragraph size is something often said in bunkers and when I'm sending reviews and things of articles. Yeah, here in Brazil, a paragraph is a sentence sometimes. But I learned that a paragraph is a concatenation of ideas and you go deeper and deeper and whatever. And I would like you to just emphasize that as well, because I don't want to be the only person saying that.
So with first stress, it's quite common that you have, the student doesn't want to repeat the terms, but then you get confused.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, there are, if you're talking about some of the especially science, where you need to be precise about the terms, how they're used, then you have to repeat it. You cannot just get a synonym which may be a synonym in everyday language, but not in science. And that's what the other topic that you mentioned. In 1991 or 2, so some years ago, there was a discipline here called Estudo de Problemas Brasileiros. The young guys don't even know what it is. This was because of the military government they wrote. So we had to do it at the graduate level as well. So we had to do it. And what was usually done, a professor or lecturer would get and invite some people to give talks, and everybody would pass. So a friend of mine from the department said, why don't you use this and give a course on writing? So, oh, that's what I did. Because then the student had to do it. So just in Portuguese, because they are just first and second year students. So we started the lectures, and I was appalled by the size of the paragraphs. They're so very small, always very small, 1 or 2 sentences. And then I asked, why do you write such small paragraphs? So one of the students said, in cursivo, our teacher says that every paragraph should contain just one idea. So you should not mix the ideas. I was impressed with that. So the next class I said, well, so if the paragraph is short, it's because you have short ideas. So there is when you learn how to write a paragraph, there is even a specific word for the first sentence, which in Portuguese is tópico frasal. So the first sentence should be a very strong sentence, saying what the paragraph is all about. And then you develop pages. So obviously a paragraph cannot be short. And it's not only because you have to concatenate ideas and have an argument in a paragraph, but also because visually it's terrible. It's terrible to read a paper or a report or a thesis with so many short paragraphs. I know that's easier because then you don't have to worry about connecting one sentence to the other. But for those who are reading, that's really bad. So I would say that a page should have 2 or 3 paragraphs at most. Obviously, you may wish to emphasize a particular statement. Then you can have a paragraph with just one sentence, even just one line. But then the reader will know that if this paragraph is separate from everything else, it means that you want to make a statement there which is really, really important. And that's the only case. Otherwise, the paragraphs should be sufficiently large. On the contrary, the sentences, for God's sake, cannot be too long. Otherwise, nobody can read it. Even in Portuguese or whatever language. There are excellent writers, these are writers who write those very long sentences, wonderful, but these are for the special class writers, not for us. Not even for a guy who is supposed to be teaching scientific writing. I don't write long sentences. I cannot do it.
Do you find there's a difference between?
Do you observe that difference between English and Portuguese when you're writing in English? You write shorter sentences, or it's the same?
I think almost the same. The Portuguese sentence can be a little bit bigger because some of the words are bigger, but no, it's more or less the same. Because it has to be readable, understandable.
We're talking about the sentences, larger or shorter or whatever. So I did my PhD in the US, and I had brought, because my advisor would say, we did it, I'm an entomologist, so in my field, we did this and then go directly. And then I came back and now I'm here and I'm doing review papers in my field, and actually they like the larger sentences. And actually they don't accept me correcting them. But sometimes it's really terrible. Yeah, like, so I'm not really, I prefer to not revise any paper anymore because of this. It's insane. Yeah, that's happens. So, and another thing what made me, actually I learned about was with the, all the students, my advisor would do and make all the students in the lab read the paper with each one was ready. So that's the best idea ever. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. That's
and each one picks one wrong thing, each one gets a different kind of thing, they see differently.
So from your remark, it came to my mind that you should not mix facts with arguments. So you have the results, your data, these are the data, the results. Then you compare with the literature. Many people mix the two things, and then it's very confusing. So nobody can understand whether this is your result, your ideas, or whether it's idea of somebody else that you are mentioning in the literature, or if this is the real facts or interpretation, which are two different things, obviously.
Something you just touched on now through that speaker there, but it's more common now to use the all the active voice. Yeah. Has it changed?
There has been a change, very large change over the last 10 or 20 years, going for the active voice. The experts in scientific writing, usually some of them are really they go too far in saying that we cannot use passive voice. But this is, I don't think it's really the ideal situation is to have a mixture of voices so that the text is pleasant to read. But the most important thing is that when you are talking about, we cannot have any sentence that is ambiguous. So when you want to say, we did it, use the active voice. Otherwise, it may be difficult to find who did it. So to avoid ambiguity, using the active voice is the best thing. Obviously, you'll be using active voice from time to time. So, passive voice.
Another question? Anybody got another question? By the way, has the list gone round? That we signed the list? No? Oh, okay, that's fine. You should sign the list. Is there another question? Anybody got another question? Portuguese or English? No?
You can buy it graphical back. You can write an email or phone.
Okay, so once again, let's thank our thank you very much for participating and speaking English and this communication. And tomorrow the workshop will be here in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. Okay? Thank you.
So if y'all